I'm not going to read Dr. Santos's bio because I'll put it up on the board, just like we did this morning for Dr. Watson. And is there anybody here this afternoon that wasn't here this morning? We have a couple of new folks. You missed my information session this morning. I hope that you can find me after class and I'll be happy to answer questions, but I give a little info session every morning this week, so the whole week is free and open to the community, and every morning at 9:45 I'll be standing right here, and I'll be giving a little quick roundup in about 15 minutes about who and what we are. But anybody that is a member here can also answer questions, and I'm sure that you've already met the people at the sign-in desk. Those are all members. They are not paid staff, and they know just about as much as I do. So we can help you with that. I also highly recommend that you stay after this class for a little bit. Dr. Stuart Farber, who is the chair of our volunteer member advisory committee, he is going to give about a half-hour session on what it means and how to audit classes here at the university. It is a huge, huge perk of your membership here at the Lifelong Learning Institute. And since Dr. Santos is a faculty member here, I don't know, do you have any non-online classes this semester?
I don't, not this semester.
Next semester?
No.
Okay. Well, hopefully, well, maybe she's not a good example. But,
not a good example.
But there have been, she teaches a lot online, but there have been times where she has taught in classroom lectures, and some of our members have followed her from here into the undergraduate classroom to sit side by side with undergraduates and take classes. And you're allowed to do that two classes a semester all year round. So you'll learn about that when it comes time after the class. For now, I'm going to also ask you that if you received the evaluation form from the front desk, and if you were here this morning but didn't turn it in because we asked you not to turn it in until after the afternoon class, please take a moment at the end of the class and fill it out, and there will be volunteers at either exit, either side, collecting the evaluation forms, and as a treat, giving you a piece of candy in return. So fill out the form and get a sweet. And also we have, this morning as part of my presentation, I talked about field trips. We do have a field trip coming up on October 26th. We're very social here in addition to educational. And if you'd like to sign up to go to Butterfly World, which is Friday the 26th, see Heike. My chief administrator, my work wife, is Heike Dose, and down that hallway are our offices and the library at the end of the hallway. You can sign up with Heike to go to Butterfly World. I believe it's a $10 charge to cover entryway. Yeah. We're not having a bus to go to Butterfly World, but there are carpooling opportunities with members. So if you want to go to Butterfly World, do not want to drive, then see. This is Nancy. Nancy is a member of our Members Advisory. Who here is from Members Advisory? I missed some of you earlier, okay? We've got 5 of our Member Advisory here, and I believe 2 are outside. So thank them if you see them. They do amazing work. I couldn't live without them. So now you've read Dr. Santos's bio, and I'm going to turn the floor over to her, and I look forward to seeing you at the information session, and come back every day this week. We've got a really interesting, varied group of speakers. So thank you for being here, and enjoy the lecture.
Good afternoon. Microphone works. Good sign. Okay, and there's my clicker. Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you today. I see some familiar faces and some new faces, and I hope that all the new faces get to be familiar faces. As Linda said, I teach in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. I teach primarily film classes when we can get enough students to enroll in the classes. So sometimes we have classes on the books that don't make because of some student enrollment. But I definitely encourage you, whether it's my classes or classes of any of the faculty here, to take advantage of the LLI's auditing opportunity, because it's really a fantastic way to meet great faculty, but also meet some great students, some great young people. We have some fantastic students at Nova, and it's really a very enriching experience. And I know that some of you in the audience have done this, and you can testify to that. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. So today we're going to talk about Hitchcock. And I'm sure that most of you have seen at least one Hitchcock film. It's kind of hard to avoid them. And there's been so much written and discussed about Hitchcock. We obviously can't talk about everything, but what I wanted to talk about today is sort of off the beaten path issues surrounding Hitchcock and his women, meaning the women in his films, primarily. I'll share with you a little game that my husband and I have played in the past, which is, this is how you get to know your friends. Sorry. We ask our friends, well, what's your top 5 Hitchcock films? And then you get the answers, and then you really get to know something more about your friends than you did before. So you've got the people who really love the older British films before he came to Hollywood. They were a certain type of film that's very different from the films that he did later. And you've got the people who like all the classics, and the people who are too cool to say that they like Psycho. And then you've got the one friend who likes Rope and Frenzy and Marnie, and then you have to start worrying about that friend. It's kind of an interesting situation. And I find that, personally myself, my list changes as time goes on. So the list that I would have had when I was an undergraduate in college is not the list that I would have had when I first started at Nova 18 years ago. And it's not the same list that I would have today. So I think it does change with your taste and with how much film you've consumed over time, and also who you are as a person. So I'm sure you have some of your favorites, and I'm sure we'll get to talking about some of these things when we get a little bit later into the presentation. But just to start with, this is very sensitive mic. I'll try not to move too much. I thought we could start off with this. Great quotation. Thank you. Do you need to do that?
No, I'm going to drop the sensitivity a little bit.
Yeah, he really did say this. And if you know anything about Hitchcock, you know that he was a purveyor of dark humor and also a lover of practical jokes. And a lot of the things that he said was deliberately to elicit controversy. So, how you take this with a grain of salt. But it does speak to his definite predilection for using blonde actresses. And they do serve, I think, a particular purpose. We'll talk about that a little bit today, but that's something that's often been discussed, so I wanted to talk about some different issues. And here's something else to just add. In response to an interviewer who said, "Why do you hate women?" And he says, "Well, I don't exactly hate them, but I don't think they're as good actors as men." And again, I take it with a grain of salt. I know that he did have admiration for certain actresses, particularly Grace Kelly, which we'll talk about in a minute. So these are some of the kinds of things that he said that led people to believe that he was a misogynist and he was not exactly friend to women. So we'll get into some of those issues in a second. It might be the necklace.
Oh, okay. If you wanted to switch off, we could switch it off if you ever feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't want it to.
Nope, not a problem.
I like it personally because I can move around, but I think that moving around is an issue.
Not a problem. Make that switch right now. Wow. Nope, not a problem. Sorry about that.
No,
Testing 1, 2, 3.
I always feel like a talk show host when I've got this thing, but okay. All right, so moving on. Just a few facts, just to get us going. Born 1899 in England, died 1980 in Los Angeles. He definitely was one of the directors, which is not uncommon in those days, who worked their way up. So they started at a lowly type job in the industry, title illustrator, to writer, to assistant director, to director. So he really did it all. So when he took the helm of his own films, he knew all the stages and he knew everything that needed to be done. And so he really was a very informed auteur in that way. He was able to as a director, understand all the stages and parts of the film. And that's why perhaps he was very controlling about all those aspects. His work at German studios early in his career influenced some of his expressionistic techniques that you see in many of his films, where he is trying to translate onto the screen visually the expression of emotion, usually negative emotions like fear and suspense, as we know. He would become a master at that. And so this was very influential in his development as an artist. He directed in Britain until 1939 when he came to Hollywood. So all the films in his filmography before that are British, and you can definitely see a difference in style, and we'll talk about how he made that bridge in a second. He was married to Alma Reveal, who was, as you may know, a very significant influence on him throughout his career. She also worked in the industry as a film editor when he met her, and especially in the earlier films, had a much more overt influence on his films, actually working side by side with him as an assistant director and in other capacities. And later in his career, as he became more famous, it was more behind the scenes, but she always had a significant influence on him and his work. And they had one daughter, Pat Hitchcock, who is in some of the films, and we'll get to her a little bit later too. He was knighted in 1979. He was nominated for 5 Oscars, but won none, even though some of his films did win Oscars, which is kind of interesting. Okay, now let's just do a summary, not an exhaustive one, but of the so-called Hitchcock blondes. So just take a look at the films, and you can see how he favored blonde actresses, and blonde actresses of a particular type in his films. So here are some of them. Ingrid Bergman, probably considered the first, and she did 3 films with him: Spellbound, Notorious, and Under Capricorn. Grace Kelly also did 3 films with him: Dial Up for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief. Kim Novak in Vertigo, Eva Marie Saint in North by Northwest, Janet Leigh in Psycho, and Tippi Hedren in The Birds and Marnie. Like I said, these are not exhaustive, but these are the big ones. Now, some may say that every actress after Grace Kelly was him trying to replace Grace Kelly after she stopped working in the business, and he would have probably made many, many more films with her if she had been willing. But it seemed like almost every actress that he tried to work with after that was his attempt to recapture what he had with her. She was really his muse in many significant ways, and he actually respected her as an actress, as a person, which it's arguably he didn't have as much respect, or perhaps any respect, for some of the other actresses. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at his treatment of women in his films, that he was really trying to recapture that, what he perceived as this magic that he had with Grace Kelly. So let's hear a little bit from the actresses themselves and what they thought of him. Tippi Hedren has had the most to say, and the most negative things to say. So these quotations are from 2 different interviews. And she has accused him of sexual harassment, quite literally. She says, "I had to be extremely strong to fight off Mr. Hitchcock. He was so insistent and obsessive. But I was an extremely strong young woman, and there was no way he was going to get the better of me." She also said, "We are dealing with a brain here that was an unusual genius, and evil and deviant." Wow. Almost to the point of dangerous because of the effect that he could have on people that were totally unsuspecting. He ruined my career, but he didn't ruin my life. Now, how did he ruin her? I guess the story is that she rebuffed his sexual advances, and thereafter he took various types of revenge on her. So for instance, in The Birds, when they were supposed to be using mechanical birds, he actually was using real birds, and she didn't know it in the attic scene, if you're familiar with the film. And so that was a much more dangerous and frightening experience than she had anticipated. So he would do things, like that. More seriously, after Marnie, he would not let her out of her contract. And so that sort of stymied things that she might have done later. Did that ruin her career? How far would her career have gone anyway? We don't know. But anyway, that's certainly what she has said about him. So that definitely casts a negative cast on his reputation, certainly with as far as she was concerned. By contrast, Kim Novak has said many things. This is one of them. "I didn't find him controlling whatsoever. I found him a joy." Sometimes Kim Novak tells stories about things that he's done, and you think, well, that doesn't really sound like a joy to me, but she won't say anything bad about him. So she would not, in interviews, badmouth him in any way, even though it sounds as though from her description of her experiences, she had a bit of a difficult time on set. So there's that. And then Ingrid Bergman at the AFI tribute to Hitchcock, shortly before his death, she called him an adorable genius, a gentleman farmer who raises goose flesh. There's a great story that she told at that event that has been reprinted many times, which is, she said that he gave her the best acting advice of her career when they were making Spellbound. And at a certain point she said to him, look, I'm just not feeling this. I don't think the character would say this. I just can't, I can't really respond in the way that I'm supposed to here. I don't know, maybe we can change this or that. And he said to her, Ingrid, fake it. And she said, that was the best acting advice anyone ever gave her. Fake it. So, there you go. Okay, so what I kind of wanted to do today is talk about films, pairs of films, different films that he's done, some of which have not been overly, discussed. To just think about some new and interesting ways that we can look at the women in the films. Rebecca and Suspicion, back to back, they're his first and second films that he did when he came to Hollywood, and there's so many similarities to them. How many of you have seen both of these films? Okay, great. So those of you who have seen both know the stories, and they are very similar. They're both co-scripted, interestingly, by a woman named Joan Harrison, and I don't know if you know her. She is, in Hollywood lore, she's a fairly interesting big character because she was one of the few women who was a writer, a producer. She worked very closely with Hitchcock along the way. So she's an interesting woman if you want to read more about her. So she co-scripted both of these films. They were, as I said, Hitchcock's first and second Hollywood films. And they have a feel to them that is similar to the earlier British films in terms of the mystery. They're both, Rebecca is more of a Gothic telling of the same kind of story, but they are both, they have that sort of, mysterious feel that you have in the earlier films that you only touch on in the later ones, I think. Joan Fontaine plays both leading women, and the characters are so similar that it's kind of funny because you think, if you're trying to think about these films, you think, well, you get confused because was she in one or the other, but actually she was in both, and she plays practically the same character. A young, naive wife who doesn't really know her husband, but there's a lot of danger that could be happening here. They're both Bluebeard tales, I would say. For those of you who were here the last time I was here and I was talking about fairy tales, this will be a little bit familiar. When I say Bluebeard, meaning that you have a story of an innocent bride, one who is unfamiliar with the dark side of the world and of life, and she is threatened by a husband who has some kind of dark past and or current evil motivations. Okay, she is in a situation where she has to decide what is going to be her path. How can she save herself if need be? So it's kind of interesting that both of these films for Hitchcock were back to back, and that Joan Fontaine is in both of them. And look at this, side by side, those are two shots. The left is from Rebecca, the right is from Suspicion. Tense car ride with possibly evil husband. So that's what you've got going on here. So you've got Laurence Olivier and Rebecca and Cary Grant in Suspicion. More on Cary Grant a little later. So some significant female characters in the story. So I have there Mrs. De Winter. Now, Maxim De Winter is Laurence Olivier's character. Joan Fontaine's character marries him. He's already been married once before to the title character, Rebecca, who's dead before the film begins. But the Joan Fontaine character doesn't have a name, which I find really fascinating. You can't even refer to her. The only thing you can say is that she is Mrs. De Winter because she's currently married to Maxim De Winter. But no one ever calls her by name. Except I think, yeah, now I'm getting confused myself. I can't remember if she's called A Little Monkey by Cary Grant or Laurence Olivier. One of them calls her that. But in any case, you never hear her referred to by an actual name. And that says a lot about the somewhat emptiness of her character. I mean, she is in peril, and she is the driver of the narrative because of the danger. But she's never like a full human being because, and you know, the name is significant in that way. So you have unnamed Joan Fontaine, and then you have Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper who was the first wife, Rebecca's everything. Confidant, maid, surrogate, mother, I mean, all kinds of roles she served, and she does not want this new woman in the house. And she does everything she can to sort of sabotage the marriage, and so we'll see more of that in a second. And then we have Rebecca's ghost. So you feel Rebecca, the former wife, in the house everywhere. Part of that is Mrs. Danvers trying to keep her memory alive, to not let her die, and therefore to not let the current marriage succeed. But the house is filled with Rebecca's things. Joan Fontaine's character, the current Mrs. De Winter, moves into her, into her space and sees all of her things, her writing desk, all of her things are monogrammed, I mean, with R's, and it's just sort of an oppressive presence. So she has to kind of negotiate her place in all of this while she's being actually sabotaged. They're trying, Mrs. Danvers is trying to eliminate her. Her husband is not much help in this. He loves her in his way, but he's an older man, a worldly man. She's very young and innocent. He's attracted to that. But he's really not helping her in this journey, in this new life. She's pretty much left to fend for herself. So Mrs. Danvers, as I mentioned, she's an older woman antagonist. She's got this fanatical attachment to Rebecca, which has been written about by critics as possibly homoerotic. She seems to have a perverse attachment to Rebecca's memory and her physical things. There's a scene where she takes one of her fur coats and she caresses it, puts it on her face, and it's creepy. I mean, it's very creepy. She wants to destroy Maxim, the husband, by destroying the new wife, basically. And there's a shot. So let's take a look at Mrs. Danvers. It's going to be fun. Bear with me. Let me get the sound up a little bit. Sorry.
Why do you hate me? What have I done to you that you should ever hate me so?
You tried to take her place and let him marry you. I've seen his face, his eyes. The same as those first weeks after she died. I used to listen to him, walking up and down, all night long, night after night, thinking of her, suffering torture because he'd lost her.
You want to know? You want to know?
You thought you could be Mrs. Dillon, live in her house, walk in her steps, take the things that were hers. She's too strong for you. You can't fight her. No one ever got the better of her. Never, never. She was beaten in the end. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a woman. It was the sea.
Stop it, stop it, oh, stop it.
You're overwrought, man. I've opened a window for you. Air would do you good.
Or a lot of air.
Why don't you go? Why don't doesn't need you. He's got his memories. He doesn't love you. He wants to be alone again with her. You've nothing to stay for. You've nothing to live for, really, have you? Look down there. It's easy, isn't it? Why don't you?
Okay. Why don't you? Love it. Yeah, we should. Yeah, near the screens. Thank you. Yeah, so she's a real piece of work, and she basically burns down Manderley all around her, and she dies in that fire. It's based, I'm sure you know, on a Daphne du Maurier novel, and there were some changes that were made, but you know, one of the issues in the film, and with all Bluebeard tales, and we'll see in Suspicion also, is this issue of how evil is the man. So is the man, you know, the question is, did he kill Rebecca? And by the end, I'm not going to ruin the end of the film if you haven't seen it, but the thing is, by the end of the film, it almost doesn't matter because you know he could have, even if he hadn't. And so this issue of potentiality of violence is an interesting one in Hitchcock, and which we'll talk about Suspicion in a minute. And if some of you have heard me talk about film noir here at the LLI also, and that's a big issue in film noir as well, the movement of film noir, this idea of even if the character doesn't commit evil deeds, he has evil thoughts, and sometimes he's punished for those evil thoughts that could become evil deeds. So part of her, the current Mrs. De Winter, part of her journey here is trying to figure out who her husband is. And the fact that we learned that Rebecca wasn't really such a nice person. She was pretty evil. She has these unnamed deviances that we don't exactly know in the film what they are, but she does seem like a fairly immoral person, and perhaps have even victimized her husband, who got enraged enough to want to kill her. But all of this swirling around this very young and innocent girl who has to grow up quite quickly in the story, and she eventually has to become strong enough to try to overcome all of these threats. So in Suspicion, similar issue, young woman married off to more experienced man. They're both sheltered characters. Lena Aysgarth, she wants excitement. She wants to get out of you know, the sway of her parents. So she marries Johnny Aysgarth, who is very freewheeling, and he's a gambler, and he's kind of a playboy character, and she wants that excitement, so she marries him. But then it begins to dawn on her that maybe he's after her money, and maybe he would do anything to get it. So this is an interesting portrayal for Cary Grant, who this is his first portrayal where he could be seen as a possibly bad guy, you know, possibly evil character. So you can thank Alfred Hitchcock for trying to expand his range in that way, and he would play some more complicated characters thenceforward. Before this, he really was a pretty happy-go-lucky leading man. Those are the kinds of roles he was taking, you know, screwball comedies and other kinds of, you know, romantic dramas and things, but not really anything where he'd be suspected of trying to kill someone. Now, in the novel that the film is based on, the Cary Grant character does kill the Lena Aysgarth character. So Johnny does kill Lena, but the production company said, no, not Cary Grant. No. So we're going to have to change that ending. And the ending became, you got most of the film leading up to the fact that this is one bad dude, to, no, he's not. You were just misinterpreting everything all along. He's really not that. He's just, you know, a gambler. So Hitch wasn't very happy about that ending. At this point, he didn't have the power that he would later on to control everything in the films that he had. And it wasn't even everything. He had to deal with the production code as well sometimes. But it's kind of an interesting, you know, I mean, you could say, well, that's a terrible ending, because, you know, you feel like you've been fed all this stuff in the film up until that point, and then you just get this wrap-up that's, seems ridiculous. But in a way, it doesn't, because you know that he's capable of it. You feel that. And in fact, perhaps it's a little bit darker even to say, okay, well, he's not trying to kill her now, but you don't know, So you don't feel completely settled at the end, even though the film wants to make you feel that way. So, how many of you have seen In a Lonely Place with Humphrey Bogart, Gloria Grant? It's a similar type of ending to me in that way, because you find out that he's not the killer, but you know he's capable of it, and so that feeling doesn't leave you, even though you have the so-called happy-ish ending. So let's take a look at a bit of suspicion. Now, this scene is when she thinks he's trying to poison her, and it's one of the, I think, more famous scenes in the film. It is the glass of milk scene. And for those of you who are very familiar with Hitchcock, you know that glasses of milk keep popping up in many of his films. So let's take a look. Oh, whoops.
Feeling better?
Yes, thank you.
Hello, Liz. How are you, my dear?
All right. I've been asleep all day, haven't I?
Isabel's brother gave you a sleeping pill this morning. Your nerves seem to be all upset. We were quite worried about you.
Cheer up. Bertram had a good look at you, although he doesn't usually attend living people. I must say he's a very able doctor. He says all you need was a little sleep.
I'll run down and tell Ethel to fix something for your supper.
He's 1 in a million, that Johnny of yours. Do you mind if I smoke?
Have you been here all afternoon?
Naturally, ever since Johnny phoned. And I warn you, you better get well. If you leave me alone much longer with this husband of yours, my career will soon be over.
Flirted with you, I suppose.
Oh, flirting. Worse than that. He's worming all my secrets out of me. I suspect you were writing a detective story on the side.
What secrets?
Oh, he's always pestering me, you know. I always swear I won't tell him, and I always do.
Did you tell him anything today?
Did I? Bertram was furious. Said he'd never confide in me again. But honestly, have you ever been able to deny Johnny anything?
Never. It was about that poison, wasn't it?
Oh, don't remind me of it. I'm ashamed and mortified and disgraced. I'm just a fool, that's all. If he writes a story on that one before I do, I suppose I'll deserve it. Now imagine, a substance in daily use everywhere. Anyone can lay his hands on it, and within a minute after taking, the victim is beautifully out of the way. Mind you, it's undetectable after death.
Is whatever it is painful?
Not in the least. In fact, I should think it would be a most pleasant death.
Good night, Lena.
Doesn't he look sinister? I mean, have you ever, I mean, not before this, but, you know, audiences before that have never seen Cary Grant look that way. So he really does look capable of it. So again, you have a woman in peril here. She is not prepared for this kind of challenge in her life, and she does get out of it, but not necessarily because of her own resourcefulness. We will see later on in Hitchcock films the female characters become rather strong and resourceful. But it's interesting how he is portraying both Joan Fontaine characters in these back-to-back films, threatened by this kind of male character, and choosing two really well-loved romantic leading men in terms of actors, and with very interesting results. And by the way, the glass of milk has a little light bulb in it, which is why it glows like that. So that one of his early little tricks, as you know, he likes to do that. So that's pretty good effect, and he would use that afterward in other films too. Okay, so here's another interesting pair of films, Notorious and North by Northwest, two of my favorites. And if you look at these films side by side, they have some interesting similarities, especially in terms of the female leads and also the way the male leads relate to them. So, Cary Grant, again, in both of these films. Two female leads, Notorious is Alicia Huberman, played by Ingrid Bergman, and North by Northwest is Eve Kendall, played by Eva Marie Saint. They're similar in several ways. They're both very sexual characters. They're forward, they're not shy about their sexuality or their desires. But this puts them in a strange place because, interestingly enough, they're both recruited as spies because of this feature, and particularly because of their pasts, which are dubious. And so they're both recruited as spies and put in dangerous situations. Cary Grant plays the male lead in both films, as I said. He is also a spy in both films. One, he's accidentally a spy in North by Northwest, and the other one, he's a career agent in Notorious. But there's an interesting dynamic between both of his characters in both films and the female leads, and this is a certain hostility. He falls in love with both characters that he plays. He falls in love with both of them, but really he's not happy about it. He doesn't really want to fall in love with them, and he's actually quite angry about it, as it turns out, because he doesn't trust them. Part of this is his suspicion of them and their sexual pasts. So he, for instance, with Alicia, Devlin is the character's name, and he is very attracted to her, but she's portrayed as alcoholic, promiscuous, and then she is recruited to become a spy because her family has Nazi in their past, and then they want him to marry a Nazi agent. They want her to marry him and spy on him, and so she is put in this position, and even though she's taking a job and doing this as a job, presumably to help her country, she is treated, once she takes this job by Devlin, very, very poorly. He's very disrespectful toward her, he's hostile toward her, and that's kind of an interesting situation, and then they have this very tense dynamic going on between them. And similarly with Eve Kendall, he doesn't know that she's a spy, and in fact, some of the things that he does once he finds out that she's with Philip Van Damme, James Mason's character, he becomes again also hostile in that film toward her, and he actually endangers her by his hostility. But in both films, he saves both women. And so masculine ideals, traditional masculine ideals, are reaffirmed, and they have sort of happy romantic ending. But again, difficult to ignore all the hostility that you see happening in the films prior to that. So very interesting, similar kind of dynamic going on with the two leading female characters and their strength, and the way that strength is kind of received by the male lead. Okay, so let's look at Notorious first. Alicia Huberman, this is some of the things we already talked about. And she marries Alex Sebastian, played by Claude Rains, the fantastic Claude Rains, he, you know, if you could feel sympathetic toward a Nazi, it might be Claude Rains in this film, because yes, we know what he is, but you do kind of feel bad for him at the end, which we'll watch in a second. I'm sorry to ruin it for you, but we have to watch this scene. Because he really was kind of duped by her, and the consequences that will come out of it for him are going to be pretty dire. And you have this dynamic between his character and Devlin. They don't meet much in the film, but the fact that Alicia is caught between them and that kind of, you know, a man that she loves but who seems to hate her now, and then a man who she loves but is evil and that she must destroy. As a female character, her having to negotiate that is a very difficult position. And it's interesting that Hitchcock created in the film this complication. She's not an easy character to try to unpack, and she's not simple, and she's not flat. And so for those people who wonder about Hitchcock's portrayal of women, this is an example of how he does portray a woman who's very, very complicated and a very difficult position. Okay, so let's take a look. We've got a few clips here, a couple clips.
I am married to an American agent.
Actually, yeah. This is Alex's mother.
Yes. It is easy to see now. I knew, but I didn't see. They picked her because of her father.
I must have been insane, mad, behaved like an idiot to believe in her with her clinging kisses.
Stop wallowing in your fond memories.
Well, what do I do? There's nothing to do. I'm done, finished. I'll find out.
They won't find out.
I'll find out what I'm married to. Look what they did to Emil Hooker. Emil who did nothing. And I've betrayed them, I've bungled, and there's no excuse. I'd do the same myself. Kill the fool who betrayed them.
There's no need for them to find out.
Mattis is very sharp.
Yes, he dislikes you. But his criticism of your talents wouldn't go that far to imagine that you are married to an American agent. We are protected by the enormity of your stupidity. For a time.
I'll take care of her myself.
No, not that way.
I stood looking at her when she was asleep. I could have...
Quiet, Alex. You're almost as impetuous as before your wedding. You barred me from that episode. Let me arrange this one. Listen to me. No one must know what she is. There must be no suspicion of her, of you, or me. She must be allowed to move about freely. But she will be on a leash. She will learn nothing further to inform. She must go, but it must happen slowly. She could become ill, and remain ill for a time, until...
If only she could become ill. So let me move this along just a bit. So they start to poison her, not with milk, but with coffee. Just wanted to clarify that. So this is a gradual process, of course, as his mother says it has to be, so no one suspects anything. Periodically, she will have to meet with Devlin to give her report, and it's in these meetings that you see the dynamic between the two of them after their initial romantic connection, and then he kind of turns on her when. I think he thinks probably that what good moral woman would do a job like this, and so he kind of hates her for that, which is really kind of hypocritical. But in any case, this is so she's in the process of being poisoned. She meets him to give her a report, and you can see a little example of their relationship.
sorry I couldn't make it on time.
I guess a bit lonely squatting on a bench all day.
Yes, Rio can be a very dull town.
What's new?
Nothing. What's new with you?
Nothing. Any domestic troubles about the other night? Any footprints in that sand yet?
No, nothing yet.
Just a social visit, huh?
A little fresh air helps.
You don't look so hot.
Well,
Sick?
no. Hangover.
That's news. Back to the bottle again, huh?
Sort of lightens my chores.
Big party?
Just the family circle.
Sounds quite jolly.
It helps life in a dull town.
You ought to take it easy on that liquor.
Don't you find Rio a little hard to take to?
Not a bad town. You look all mashed up. Must have been quite an evening.
Yeah, it was.
Tell kids you want to play that way. Go on, have fun. No reason why you shouldn't.
That's right. Here's something that belongs to you. I should have given it to you sooner.
What is it?
A scarf that you lent me once in Miami.
Cleaning house, huh?
Well, goodbye, Dad.
What do you mean, goodbye?
Nothing, just goodbye. Fresh air isn't as good for hangovers, I thought.
Sit down, you're still tight.
I don't want to.
Where are you going?
Back home.
You are not taking care of yourself, Alicia.
I feel one.
So he does begin to suspect something, as you can see here, but this, you can also get the sense of their history and how he is not exactly forgiving of her and her situation, not exactly sympathetic, and certainly not seeming to want to continue their romantic relationship in any way. So then, though, he does become her savior, and he becomes the one to rescue her. It begins to be clear that she is in real danger of her life, and so then we get this scene right here.
Alicia. Alicia. Alicia, what's wrong with you? Dad. I couldn't stand anymore. Waiting and worrying about you. It wasn't the hangover you had that day. You were sick then. What is it? What's wrong with you, Alicia? What is it, dear? What's wrong with you?
That voice. I couldn't get away from them. I tried, but I was too weak.
How long?
Party. And it's Miss Father.
You won't try to stop. Stop. I'm going to get you out of here.
I thought you had gone.
No, I had to see you once you in one piece. I was getting out because I love you. I couldn't bear seeing you and him together.
Why didn't you?
I know.
They gave me pills to sleep.
Keep awake. Keep talking. Your coat.
In the closet. I didn't want the others to know about me.
What happened? What happened?
Alex found out.
And the others haven't.
They'd kill him if they knew. They killed Emil.
You in pain?
I don't know. The pills.
You'll think.
Say it again. It keeps me awake.
I love you. Stand up. Stand up.
Oh,
Come on, wake up. Talk.
Dr. Henderson.
Go on, walk. Talk.
Roseanne comes from the Imoris Mountains.
We'll find it.
Her town. That's the most.
Good girl. We'll take care of it later. Come on, keep awake, keep walking.
Oh, I'm afraid they're all in the house. We can't make it. Don't ever leave.
You'll never get rid of me again.
I never tried.
Breaks up, here he comes. What are you doing, Monsieur? What is this, Mr. Devlin? I'm taking her to the hospital to get the poison out of her. Poison? How'd you like your friends downstairs to know? Maybe you had to be told. I'm taking her back to her room. I'll raise quite a rumpus if we try.
Alex. Who knows?
Yeah. What is happening, Alex?
Alicia.
She's red.
Yes.
Come. Tell her we're going. You haven't forgotten what they did to Emil, have you, Sebastian?
Help me, Alex.
In fact, you have a head on you, madame. I'm not afraid to die. You've got your chance here and now. Tell her who she is. Need any head, Alex? No, we can handle her. Where are you taking her? You answer that one, Sebastian.
To the hospital. Alex, talk to them quick.
Lad, she's going. Should not have waited so long. What am I going to do? Start shooting? Hold on, darling. I've got about 20 hours to go. What happened, Alex? Huh? Oh, she collapsed. Mr. Devlin had a scream when he was waiting for me. Come on, Alicia. Yes, I telephoned the hospital as soon as I saw how she was.
You have a car, Mr. Devlin?
Out in front.
Your head, Alex.
You're going with the mother?
No. Alex will call me up. I'll wait here.
How do you feel?
Bit dizzy.
Take some deep breaths. Hurry. No, just a minute. I was with her. No room, Sebastian. But you must take me. They're watching me. It's your headache. Please, take me. Please. There's no telephone in her room to call the hospital. Alex, will you come in, please? Come in.
It's a long walk up those steps. Okay, there's so much going on in that sequence. So many interesting things. Obviously, the romantic dynamic between Alicia and Devlin He says he was fat-headed and he couldn't stand anyone being with her, and that's why he acted like such a jerk. And and so, but now that he has to be in a position of helping her and rescuing her, their romance can actually survive, and he can be that person for her. Of course, she physically needs him because there is no one else to help her, and she is in a dire condition. You see a lot of interesting camera work there. The close-ups, really the extreme close-ups between the two of them, their faces and their proximity to each other, the whispering creates a really overwhelming sense of intimacy. And Hitchcock was really good in many films at creating that kind of intimacy and connection, and sometimes real sexuality without even, nobody's clothes are gone and nothing is, maybe people aren't even kissing, but you have this very powerful sense of intimacy and connection that he was able to achieve just with his camera work and the positioning of the lighting and so forth. So you see a good example of that there. It's not sexual here, it's more affection and real feeling, but it's still very powerful. And also, we're not going to really talk too much about Hitchcock being the master of suspense because everybody knows about that. He was very famous for saying it's much more powerful to draw out a sense of anxiety than just giving the viewer a surprise, which is, he says, that's 15 seconds. You could get 3 or 4 minutes out of it if you do it right. So the whole staircase scene as he's walking her down the staircase is an example of that kind of suspense. And for Hitchcock, the audience being in on it is a definite example of the suspense. So his famous quotation about the surprise versus suspense, he says, you could put a bomb under somebody's chair, it goes, and then it just goes off and that's it, and it's, well, the audience is shocked and that's the end of that. He says, but, he said, it's better to show the audience where the bomb is, and then you don't know when it's going to go off, and you don't know what's going to happen to the characters who are in the room with the bomb, and how will they get out of it. So this is an example in the staircase scene of how you have Alicia between the two men, and one is paralyzed because he doesn't want to be found out by his Nazi compatriots, and he's in a very difficult position, and she's in physical danger, and Hitchcock just draws it out as long as absolutely possible, because you really don't know how it's all going to, come out. Even if you're, confident that it will all come out okay for Alicia and Devlin, you don't really know how that's going to happen. So, in any case, that lot really, going on in that scene, and an interesting example of a female character that's a little off the beaten path for those who think that Hitchcock is just all about one-dimensional treatment of women. And North by Northwest is also a similar case of this. Eve Kendall is the female lead. She is romantically involved with James Mason's Philip Van Dam, a very, very unsavory criminal character, and dangerous enough for the government to take notice of him, and for them to recruit her, because she is his lover, to spy on him and hopefully aid them in bringing him down. If you've seen how many of you have seen North by Northwest? It's one of the biggies, so you may remember that Martin Landau's character Leonard is James Mason's henchman, who is an interesting character and a more minor character, but one that's been written about as having an interesting dynamic between Eve Kendall and James Mason, because Leonard has a very strong attachment to his boss. He's very attached to Van Dam. He'll do anything for him. Some question whether there's some sort of homoeroticism going on there because of his very fanatical attachment. And so this is an example of a similar kind of character as Mrs. Danvers in terms of the destructive nature of a character like that. And there he is with James Mason's Philip Van Dam. So we've got a few clips here that I want to show you. And these have to do with the dynamic between Eve Kendall and Roger Thornhill, who is the accidental agent. One of Hitchcock's famous long-running fascinations was wrongly accused. Okay, so Roger Thornhill character is mistaken for someone else, and then he gets trapped into this whole web of intrigue. And so on his journey, he meets he meets Eve and Philip. So just to set things up, this is the auction scene, which you may remember if you know the film. And this is after the crop dusting scene. So he thinks that Eve has set him up to go out there and almost get killed if he hadn't been able to save himself. And so he follows her to this location, and he recognizes Philip Van Damme as the orchestrator of the plan to put him in this kind of danger. But watch, what I really want to show this to you is to look at the hostility toward the female character and how that's played with, which again is not the kind of thing you would necessarily think about when you think about the way that the Hitchcock blondes are portrayed.
This magnificent pair of Louis XVI Couture, original gilt finish, upholstered in pure silk damask. How much may I say to start? What am I bid?
100.
100 is bid, thank you. 150 is bid here, say the 200. Thank you. 200 is bid, say the 300. I have 300. 400, my little lady. Thank you, sir. 450 is bid for the pair. Can I hear 500? Will you say 500? Can I say the 500? Fair warning, last call. Sold to Mr. Stone, second row. $450. And now lot number 103. This lovely Aubusson settee, in excellent condition. Please start the bidding. How much? 800 is offered, thank you. 800 is bid, say the 9, go 900. 900 is bid, now who'll say 1,000? 1,000, thank you. 1,000 at 1,000, say 1,100. Can I hear 1,100? Selling at 1,000.
Three of you together. Now that's a picture only Charles Adams could draw.
Good evening, Mr. Captain.
Before we start calling each other names, perhaps you'd better tell me yours. I haven't had the pleasure.
You disappointed me, sir.
I was just going to say that to her.
I always understood you were a pretty shrewd fellow at your job. What possessed you to come blundering in here like this? Could it be an overpowering interest in art?
Yes, the art of survival. Well, have you poured any good drugs lately?
He followed me here from the hotel.
He was in your room. Sure, isn't everybody?
150, thank you. Now say the 2. Do I hear 2? 200, thank you. Now the 3, do I hear 3? 300, anyone? 300, thank you. Now the 4, do I hear 4? 400, anyone? 400 is bid. Say the 5. I have 400, I have 400.
I didn't realize you were an art collector. I thought you just collected corpses.
500.
500, thank you.
I'll bet you paid plenty for this little piece of sculpture.
700.
She's worth every dollar of it. Take it from me. And she puts her heart into her work. In fact, her whole body.
Then to Mr. Van Damme at 700.
Ouch.
Number 106 for your pleasure is the...
Oh, Mr. Van Damme.
Has anyone ever told you that you overplay your various roles rather severely, Mr. Captain? First, you're the outraged Madison Avenue man who claims he's been mistaken for someone else. Then you play the fugitive from justice, supposedly trying to clear his name of a crime he knows he didn't commit. Now you play the peevish lover, stung by jealousy and betrayal. Seems to me you fellows would stand a little less training from the FBI, a little more from the actor's studio.
Apparently, the only performance that'll satisfy you is when I play dead.
Your very next role will be quite convincing, I'm sure.
$25. Thank you. 375 is bid. I have 375, go to 400. 375, go 4. 400 is bid.
I wonder what subtle form of manslaughter is next on the program. Am I to be dropped into a vat of molten steel and become part of a new skyscraper? Or are you going to ask this female to kiss me again and poison me to death? Who are you kidding? You have no feelings to hurt.
How much to start the bidding on this collector's porcelain? Please start the bidding.
Mr. Kaplan, we've had just about enough of you.
Then why don't you send for the police?
600.
The last thing you'd want, isn't it, me in the hands of the police? There's something I might tell them. And that's the reason you had this one here hustling me on the train last night. Because something seems to tell me I've got a much better chance of survival if I go to the police. Good night, sweetheart. Don't think it wasn't nice.
Say the 12. $1,200 there. 1,200 is bid. Say 1,300.
That's brutal, right? So the at this point they have a little romance on the train, and then he thinks that she's turned on him, and therefore you have this scene that's going on here. But of course, what he doesn't know is that she is a spy, and she's working for the government, and the idea is to take down Philip Van Dam. But by doing this, he's actually endangered her because he's cast suspicion on her to Van Dam. And that is very dangerous to her because everything relies on him being convinced that he can trust her. So eventually he comes to realize, Roger Thornhill, that is, Cary Grant's character, comes to realize, learns who she is, what's actually going on, and of course then he's quite apologetic and so forth, and then he does end up saving her in the end in the famous Mount Rushmore scene, which we don't have time to watch, but it's definitely worth watching or rewatching. But the reason I wanted to talk about that part is that you see the explicit composition of the frame where you have the two men and she's sitting down in between them. And she really is quite literally caught in the middle in all ways, and you can see the look on her face, even though she's trying to remain calm, she's getting angrier and angrier because it's unjust, and she can't blow her cover, but she is being treated quite brutally by Roger Thornhill. And again, Cary Grant has evolved as an actor in his roles by this point, 1959, and you're seeing a very interesting side of both him as an actor, but also the portrayal of the so-called Hitchcock blonde. She is not a victim necessarily, even though she needs to get saved in the end by the man. She is quite resourceful. She does have to fend for herself and be in these situations of extreme danger and peril. And so his use of that kind of a character, I think, the way that she looks, and by the way, you may know that Hitchcock was extremely attentive to detail in terms of the way the actresses' clothes would be, the way their hair would look. He really wanted to create this almost symbol of a femininity of a particular type that he wanted to utilize in each film. And these films do make an interesting counterpoint to one another. So I don't want to run out of time, so we're going to skip the rest of the clips. I think that's okay, though. We're going to talk about Shadow of a Doubt. How many of you have seen Shadow of a Doubt? Fewer, because it's not as widely seen as some of the others. And a very different female character here, not a blonde, but a young adult woman, played by Teresa Wright, wonderful actress. And the story is a suburban thriller, I guess you'd call it, where Charlie Newton, played by Teresa Wright, learns that her favorite uncle, who she's named after, Charlie Oakley, played by Joseph Cotton, is actually a serial murderer. Sounds normal. Now, if you've seen the film, you know that it's great for so many reasons. One of the great things about it is the humor of the film. There's so much really interesting dark humor and outright humor in a film that's about a really terribly dark subject. So Charlie Oakley is a serial murderer. He murders rich widows. And he has a lot of contempt for women, which we'll see in a second. And he's got the police on his trail, so he comes to hide out in his sister's house in suburbia, so they won't find him. And the family is thrilled because they love Uncle Charlie. He's awesome, he's suave, he's worldly, he's seen everything. And Charlie, his niece, Charlie, is especially enamored of him. They have an extremely close bond. And it's almost like the bond that you have if you're growing up, you're a young adolescent. I mean, she's probably, I think, around 17 in the film, her character. But she has this attachment to him. They seem to have almost a psychic connection. So he has, and he reciprocates this affection. He sees an innocence in her, what he cannot seem to get from his other relationships with other women, the older women that he victimizes, even though he does get their money. And she sees experience in him, what she would aspire to for herself, her future romantic interests. The opening of the film is her lamenting how nothing ever happens in the town and how her life is just kind of meaningless and where does she go from here. So he injects into their everyday lives this kind of excitement, although it's the kind of excitement that you wouldn't necessarily want. So, but they do have this really, really close relationship. And she ends up saving the day, actually, and it's symbolic in the sense that her innocence and her learning about the dangers in the world is what eventually saves other women. He tries to kill her at the end of the film, and she ends up, in the course of trying to get away, he ends up falling from a train, big surprise, and that's the end of him. So I want to show you a scene from probably about 2/3 of the way through the film. This is when she has realized, it has by little clues, it has dawned on her that he really is the Merry Widow murderer. So let's take a look.
Drive carefully, same as a horse.
Andrew? Disgusting.
Mom, can I get my bread in it?
Where's Charlie?
She wanted to see us for dinner tonight. She'll be in a minute.
You're right, Joe. Nothing special. Nothing special tonight. Oh, yes, she is. Here's my girl.
I wonder how many hours you slept. If you could tell me exact minutes you went to sleep, the exact minutes you woke up, then tell if you woke up in between, and how long you stayed awake each time you woke up, then I can tell you exactly
You won't
how
be able to sleep tonight, Charlie. Nobody who sleeps all day can sleep all night, too.
I slept all right. I kept dreaming. Perfect nightmares. About you, Uncle Charlie.
Nightmares about me?
Uh-huh. You were on a train, and I had a feeling you were running away from something. And when I saw you on the train, I felt terribly happy.
Like Charlie, how would you feel happy seeing Uncle Charlie on the train? Goodness knows I don't want to see him on the train. I hope he stays here forever.
Well, he has to leave sometime. I mean, we all realize he has to leave sometime. We have to face the facts.
I like people who face facts.
And, well, we're not going to face any such facts as those.
When, huh? Would you like to see the funnies?
I'm too old for funnies. I read 2 books a week. I took a sacred oath I would. Besides, in this family, no one's allowed to leave the table. It isn't polite.
Don't correct your elder.
She's right, Abby. I'm forgetting the manners. Joe, I'm going to blame this paper on you. Oh. Roger, go to the kitchen, look in the icebox, and bring me a big red bottle you'll find there.
You can throw the paper away. Dad's read it, and you've read it. We don't need to play any games with it tonight.
And you can help Charlie carry in the vegetables. I saw that bottle when I was getting dinner.
You know what St. Paul said? Take a little wine for thy stomach's sake.
Wine for dinner. Sounds so gay. Charles, remember the time they had the champagne when the oldest Jones girl got married?
This is sparkling burgundy.
Well, one sip, and I'll be calling it sparkling burgundy. Hey, you better not take it.
Oh, imported?
Charles, imported Frankie and his tweeds.
And his loaded cave.
He's loaded everything. Roger, go to the cupboard and get 4 of the small glasses with stems. Charles, I promised Mrs. Green, the president of our club, that you'd talk to the ladies, and she wants to know what you're going to talk about.
Well, what am I going to talk about? Lectures usually give them travel or current events, don't they?
Oh, Charles, not current events. We get current events.
What sort of an audience would be?
Oh, women like myself, busy with our homes, most of us.
Women keep busy in towns like this. The city's different. The cities are full of women, middle-aged widows, husbands dead, husbands who've spent their lives making fortunes, working and working. And then they die and leave their money to their wives, their silly wives. And what do the wives do, these useless women? You see them in the hotels, the best hotels every day by the thousands. Drinking the money, eating the money, losing the money at bridge, playing all day and all night, smelling of money.
proud of their jewelry, but of nothing else. Horrible. Faded, fat, greedy women.
They're alive, they're human beings.
Are they? Are they, Charlie? Are they human or are they fat, wheezing animals? Hmm? What happens to animals when they get too fat and too old? Well, I seem to be making my speech right here.
For heaven's sake, don't talk about women like that in front of my club. You'll be tarred and feathered. The idea. And that nice Mrs. Potter's going to be there, too. She was asking me about you.
A widow, also. So I'm just skipping a little bit forward from that dinner scene. At one point, Charlie gets very upset. She runs out of the house, runs down the street. He follows her, and he pulls her into this bar, and then they have this conversation.
Why'd you bring me in here?
What does it matter where we are?
Hello, Charlie. Hello. Hello, Louise. Charlie, this is Louise Finch.
Hello.
Glad to meet you. This is my Uncle Louise. I was in Charlie's class in school. I sure was surprised to see you come in. I never thought I'd see you here. I've been here 2 weeks. Lost my job over at Kearns. I've been in half the restaurants in town. What do you have, Charlie?
Nothing, thank you.
Bring her some ginger ale. I'll have a double brandy.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Charlie,
Well,
I think you know something, don't you? That young fellow told you something.
Jack, why should he know anything about you?
Now look, Charlie. Something's come between us. I don't want that to happen. Why? We're old friends. More than that. We're like twins. You said so yourself.
Don't touch me, Uncle Charlie.
What did he tell you? What did that boy tell you?
It's got nothing to do with it. I hope he never knows anything about you.
Charlie, you're a pretty understanding sort of girl. You've heard some little things about me. I guess you're a woman of the world enough to overlook them. You're the head of your family, Charlie. Anyone can see that. I'm not so old. I've been chasing around the globe since I was 16. I guess I've done some pretty foolish things. Made some pretty foolish mistakes. Nothing serious, just foolish. Oh, Charlie, now. Don't start imagining things.
How could you do such things? You're my uncle, my mother's brother. We thought you were the most wonderful man in the world. Most wonderful and the best.
Charlie, what do you know?
I'm sorry I was so long and awful busy. Whose is it? Ain't it beautiful? I just died burying like that. Yes, sir, burying like that, I just about died. I love jewelry. Real jewelry. You notice I didn't even have to ask if it was real. You can tell. I can.
Bring me another brandy.
Yes.
Sit down. Sit down. You think you know something, don't you? You think you're the clever little girl who knows something. There's so much you don't know. So much. What do you know, really? You're just an ordinary little girl living in an ordinary little town. You wake up every morning of your life and you know perfectly well that there's nothing in the world to trouble you. You go through the ordinary little day, and at night you sleep your untroubled, ordinary little sleep filled with peaceful, stupid dreams. And I brought you nightmares. Or did I? Or was it a silly, inexpert little lie? You live in a dream. You're a sleepwalker blind. How do you know what the world is like? Do you know the world is a foul sty? Do you know if you rip the fronts off houses you'd find swine? The world's a hell. What does it matter what happens in it? Wake up, Charlie. Use your wits. Learn something.
You going, Joe?
So we're seeing a lot of interesting things here. One, of course, his little speech at dinner about what he thinks about certain kinds of women, which you see that he's beginning to crack a little bit because him making that speech at the dinner table, you would think he'd be a little more careful with that. But Charlie already knows about him and what he is based on various other things that have happened thus far in the film. And she's, as you can see, extremely disillusioned. The ring she puts on the table is one that he gave her as a gift, which she loved, but she realized there's already an engraving on the inside. And at first she thinks, oh, well, it's just something, you know, that indicates some kind of happy past of someone, but then she comes to realize what it actually is and where it actually comes from. And of course, her struggle is not only to, you know, stay physically safe, but to combat the kind of disillusion and cynicism that he has come to represent, how terrible a world you live in, and you know, you're just living in a dream, and how do you retain any kind of innocence in a world like this? And so Teresa Wright's character, her character of Charlie, is really very, she's very strong, she's troubled, but you see her grow and come of age in the film, and get beyond her adolescent infatuation with her uncle, and who beautifully played by Joseph Cotton, who is 1 minute incredibly charming and the next minute incredibly sinister. So really, you know, he's such a great actor anyway, so really a good job by him. But she, again, it's not, when you think about female characters in Hitchcock, your mind doesn't immediately go to her, but she's much more complex than some of the other characters. And interestingly, you see this come out of Wright close to Suspicion and Rebecca, similar innocent female characters trying to make their way in a very hostile and complicated world populated by dangerous men. So we're getting close to running out of time. I wanted to mention a little bit about Vertigo and Psycho, because it's another interesting pairing. Vertigo is often people's favorite Hitchcock movies. It's beautifully shot, gorgeous, weird. You have a juxtaposition of glamour and sexual fantasy versus common sense and reality in both films. So Madeline and Judy, both played by Kim Novak in Vertigo, versus Midge, Barbara Bel Geddes' character, the sort of real kind of girlfriend that Scotty Ferguson can have in Vertigo versus the fantasy of Madeline and Judy. And Marion, Janet Leigh's character, versus her sister Lila. And you know, and we'll look at some photos, some stills in a second, and how Lila, like many actually like many female characters in Hitchcock, including Charlie from Shadow of a Doubt, becomes a detective. The woman is often the one who has to figure out the mystery, and it's not the glamorous woman either that has to do that, but often the smart one. So, and you also have psychologically disturbed male leads. Scotty Ferguson is not homicidal, but he is very disturbed. And we know about Norman Bates, I think. So, and as I also mentioned, detection. So here's some stills. So you see Kim Novak in the far left as Madeline, the constructed identity that Scotty falls in love with. Judy on the right, with the green sweater, that's who she really is, but who Scotty cannot fall in love with because she's just too common, and she does not fit the idealized version of womanhood that Madeline represents. And then in the bottom, we have Midge, who is his friend, former fiance, and supporter. And of course, you know, the ending is tragic, and just goes to show the futility of these kinds of romantic illusions. And then, of course, some stills from Psycho. The famous white underwear, black underwear juxtaposition of Janet Leigh, white underwear before she realizes that she's going to steal the money and get out of town, black underwear after that. And then on the left is her encounter with Norman Bates in the parlor having sandwiches, and guess what? Milk. That'll be for another L.I. talk about milk in Hitchcock. But, and then we have Lila Crane on the bottom, who has to solve the murder, essentially, of her sister, what happened to her sister, and how that all came to be. So you have an interesting comparison between those two films as well. And finally, this is what I wanted to leave you with. Girls who wear glasses. There's an awful lot of them in Hitchcock. These are just a few. So we have Midge from the upper left-hand side. In the center is Ingrid Bergman playing Constance Peterson from Spellbound. She plays a psychiatrist. Top right is Lena Aysgarth from Suspicion, when she's on the train when she meets Johnny. And the bottom right is from Strangers on a Train, which we didn't talk about, and that is Pat Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock's daughter. And from the same film on the far left, Miriam Haynes, who gets killed. And she is one of the only glasses-wearing, spectacles-wearing Hitchcock women who is also portrayed as femme fatale, as a very sexual character. And you may remember, if you've seen that film, the famous shot of the glasses and the murder that happens reflected in them, because she does get killed. So, and why am I ending on this? Even though it's just kind of interesting, I think it just it reinforces not only Hitchcock's fascination with seeing, and some would say voyeurism, certainly in some of his films, but also to see the women in Hitchcock with a different lens, because there are so many interesting female characters that go beyond just the blonde ones. And the stereotypical glamorous blonde characters, because he really did treat the female characters and their function in the stories in very complex and meaningful ways. And so there's a lot of richness there. So I would definitely encourage you to see the films that we talked about, or see them again if you haven't. And that's all I had for today. But thank you. But I'd like to open it up to questions, comments. I know we're almost out of time. Yes, sir.
It's a little off point vis-a-vis women, but when did he start to insert himself in his film? And he did.
Oh, gosh, from very early on, and I can't recall the first one, but from early, he was doing it very early on.
And then so Family Plot.
Yeah, I know he was in Life. He did it in Lifeboat, and in Lifeboat that was fairly early. And in that one, I think he's actually in a weight loss ad in the newspaper, which is kind of funny. He had such a great sense of humor. I can't recall the first one. That may have been the first one, but I don't know offhand. We'll have to look that up. Anything else? Other questions, comments? Okay, look forward to seeing you next time.